While visiting the barn, the millionaire froze when the female farmer opened a chest with a key engraved with the initials of his late beloved. What she said left him speechless. The sleek black Bentley cut through the morning mist like a knife through silk, its pristine exterior reflecting the golden sunrise over Hope Valley's rolling hills. William Will. Hargrove sat rigid in the back seat, his steel gray eyes fixed on the landscape that had haunted his dreams for 28 years. The same winding roads, the same weathered barns, the same damn wildflowers dancing in the breeze, as if time had frozen the moment he'd left this place broken and penniless. "Sir, we'll arrive at the hotel in 10 minutes, his assistant Marcus said from the front passenger seat, tablet already in hand. The first meeting with the mayor is scheduled for 9:30. Will adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken. And the property assessments. Complete, sir. 93% of landowners have agreed to sell. The holdouts are mostly elderly folks who'll come around once they see the compensation packages. Mostly. Will's jaw tightened imperceptibly. In his world, mostly was failure. He hadn't built a $15 billion empire by accepting partial victories. The Bentley slowed as they entered Hope Valley's Main Street, if you could even call it that. Same old Murphy's General Store with its faded red awnings. Same rusty pickup trucks parked at odd angles. Same group of old-timers nursing coffee on the diner's front porch. Will felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. The same one that had twisted his guts the day he'd sworn never to return. Never say never, Grace, he thought bitterly. Looks like I'm back to finish what we started. The Grand Valley Inn, Hope Valley's attempt at luxury, stood like a fresh coat of paint on a rotting fence. Will had stayed in palaces that paled in comparison to his penthouse in Manhattan, but this would have to do. As his security detail swept the lobby, he caught his reflection in the lobby mirror, 50 years old, silver threading through his dark hair. Lines etched around his eyes that spoke of countless boardroom battles and sleepless nights. The scared 22-year-old who'd fled this place was nowhere to be found. Good. That kid had been weak, powerless. Everything Will had sworn, never to be again. "Mr. Hargrove." Mayor Patricia Collins bustled toward him like an overeager puppy, her smile bright enough to power the entire town. "Welcome back to Hope Valley, though I suppose you don't remember much about—" "I remember everything, Mayor Collins." Will's voice cut through her enthusiasm like winter wind. "Shall we get started?" The next 3 hours blurred together in a choreographed dance Will knew by heart, spread the blueprints, paint the vision, show the numbers. Hope Valley Luxury Resort and Spa. 2,000 acres of pristine wilderness transformed into a playground for the wealthy. Golf courses where cattle once grazed. Infinity pools overlooking valleys where he'd once carved his and Grace's initials into oak trees. "The economic impact will be tremendous," Will explained, his laser pointer dancing across profit projections. 300 permanent jobs, seasonal employment for hundreds more. Property values will triple overnight. Mayor Collins practically glowed. And the timeline, 18 months from groundbreaking to grand opening. But that depends entirely on land acquisition. Will's tone sharpened. "I understand there are still some complications." The mayor's smile flickered. "Well, yes. Most folks are thrilled, of course. The compensation you're offering is more than generous, but there are always a few stubborn holdouts. Names. Excuse me. I need names. Addresses and individual concerns. My team will handle the rest." Mayor Collins shifted uncomfortably. "There's old Pete Morrison. He's been on his land for 60 years. Sarah Beth Williams runs the organic farm on Sunset Ridge. A few others scattered around the valley. But the biggest issue is the Carter property." Something cold slithered down Will's spine. Carter. Emily Carter. Young woman, maybe 27 or so, lives on that big spread that belonged to Carmen Delgado. You might remember her. Carmen passed about 6 months ago. Left everything to Emily, sweet girl. But stubborn as a mule when it comes to that land. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Carmen Delgado, Grace's best friend. The woman who'd held Grace's hand in the hospital, who'd spoken at the funeral when Will was too devastated to form words. She'd tried to reach out to him after he'd left town, but he'd changed his number, burned every bridge, buried every connection to this place and its memories. "Sir, are you all right?" Marcus touched his arm. Will realized he'd been staring at the wall for several long seconds. "Fine. Tell me about this Emily Carter." Mayor Collins leaned forward conspiratorially. "Like I said, sweet girl, Carmen raised her from a baby. Never knew her real parents. Works that farm like it's her life's mission. The whole community adores her. But she's made it crystal clear that the land isn't for sale at any price." Any price. Will almost smiled. Everyone had a price. It was just a matter of finding the right currency. Money, pressure, leverage, fear. He'd learned to speak them all fluently. "Where's the property located?" "About 15 minutes north of town, you can't miss it. Big white farmhouse, red barn, fields of sunflowers this time of year." Carmen always loved those sunflowers. The knot in Will's stomach tightened. He remembered those sunflowers. Grace used to drag him there every summer to help Carmen with the harvest, laughing as pollen dusted her dark hair golden. She'd said they looked like tiny suns, bringing light to even the darkest corners of the valley. "We'll need to schedule a meeting with Mrs. Carter," Will said, his voice steady despite the memories clawing at his chest. "This week. I'm not sure she'll agree to—" "She'll agree." Will stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Everyone agrees. Eventually. It's just a matter of finding the right approach," as Mayor Collins and her entourage filed out. Chattering excitedly about their economic windfall, Will found himself alone with Marcus and the blueprints. The laser pointer trembled slightly in his hand as he traced the property lines that would erase every trace of his past. "Sir, should I arrange security for the Carter meeting?" Marcus asked. "If she's as stubborn as they say, no." Will's response surprised even himself. "This one I handle personally. Emily Carter, raised by Carmen from a baby, Grace's best friend Carmen, who'd known all their secrets, who'd promised to keep their memory alive, who'd tried so desperately to maintain contact when grief had made Will disappear completely. What were the odds, in a valley of fewer than 3,000 people? What were the chances that the one person standing between him and his grand design would be connected to the woman who'd meant everything to both him and Grace? Will walked to the window, gazing out at the hills where he'd once believed in happy endings. Somewhere out there, a young woman tended sunflowers and thought she could stand against the full weight of his empire. She had no idea what was coming her way, but as Will studied his reflection in the glass, older, harder, infinitely more powerful than the broken boy who'd left this place, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had no idea what was coming his way either. The battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow, he would drive out to the Carter farm and make Emily Carter an offer she couldn't refuse. It was just business after all. So why did his hands shake as he reached for his phone to make the appointment? The gravel road to the Carter farm crunched beneath the Bentley's tires like broken promises. Will had insisted on driving himself this time, much to Marcus's protests about security protocols and proper representation. But this wasn't about protocols. This was personal, though he couldn't quite explain why. The farmhouse appeared around a bend exactly as Mayor Collins had described. White clapboard siding weathered to a soft cream, wraparound porch with hanging baskets overflowing with petunias, and beyond it, fields upon fields of sunflowers turning their faces toward the morning sun like golden prayers. Will's breath caught in his throat. It was achingly familiar, as if he'd driven this road just yesterday instead of nearly 3 decades ago. He parked beside a dusty red pickup truck that had seen better years, probably better decades. The silence that followed when he cut the engine was profound, broken only by the distant hum of bees working the sunflower fields and the soft creak of wind chimes on the porch. It was the kind of peace that money couldn't buy, the kind his Manhattan penthouse with its bulletproof windows and white noise machines could never achieve. Focus, he reminded himself. This is business. Before he could second-guess himself, Will straightened his Italian silk tie and strode toward the front door. But as he raised his hand to knock, voices drifted from around the side of the house. One feminine, patient, tinged with gentle authority. "Easy, Buttercup. I know it hurts, but fighting me won't help." Curiosity overrode protocol. Will followed the voice around the corner and stopped dead in his tracks. A young woman knelt in the dirt beside a massive golden retriever, carefully examining the dog's injured paw. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dirt smudged her faded jeans, and her oversized flannel shirt had seen better days. She should have looked unremarkable. Just another small-town farm girl tending to her animals. But when she glanced up at the sound of his footsteps, Will felt the earth shift beneath his feet. Those eyes, emerald green, flecked with gold, framed by thick lashes that no amount of makeup could replicate. They were Grace's eyes, exactly as he remembered them. Intelligent, defiant, capable of seeing straight through to a person's soul. For a heartbeat, Will was 22 again, standing in this very yard, watching Grace laugh as she chased fireflies through the summer twilight. "Can I help you?" The voice was different, slightly deeper, with a hint of caution that Grace had never needed. But those eyes, Will forced himself to breathe, to remember who he was now. Emily Carter. She stood slowly, keeping one hand on the dog's head. "Depends who's asking. William Hargrove, I believe Mayor Collins mentioned I'd be stopping by." Something shifted in her expression. Not recognition exactly, but wariness. "Ah, the bulldozer man. Excuse me. That's what folks around here are calling you. The man who wants to bulldoze our home to build a playground for rich people." She turned back to the dog, dismissing him as effectively as if she'd slammed a door in his face. "Buttercup here stepped on a piece of glass, unless you're here to help me dig it out. I suggest you wait on the porch." Will blinked. In 30 years of business dealings, no one had ever dismissed him so casually. Presidents had rearranged their schedules for him. CEOs flew across continents to shake his hand, and this farm girl was telling him to wait on the porch like a traveling salesman. "Miss Carter, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." She didn't look up from the dog's paw. "You want my land. I'm not selling." Pretty straightforward, really. "Perhaps if you heard the offer, could you hand me that bottle of antiseptic?" "It's right behind you." Will turned, spotted the brown bottle on a nearby fence post, and found himself handing it to her before he'd consciously decided to help. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and he felt an odd jolt. Not attraction exactly, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe, though that was impossible. "Thank you." She poured the antiseptic over tweezers, then looked up at him again. "You're still here. The offer I'm prepared to make is more than generous, Mrs. Carter. Enough to buy 10 farms like this one anywhere in the country." "And why would I want 10 farms?" She began working on the dog's paw with steady, practiced hands. "I've got the one I need right here." Will crouched down beside her, surprising them both. "You're losing money every year. Small farms like this can't compete with agribusiness. In 5 years, maybe 10, you'll be forced to sell anyway. Probably for a fraction of what I'm offering now." She paused in her work, finally giving him her full attention. This close. The resemblance to Grace was even more striking. Not just the eyes, but the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. "You know a lot about farming for a city boy. I know about economics, supply and demand, market forces." "Market forces." She said it like it tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it when Walmart moves into a small town and kills every mom and pop shop on Main Street?" "I call it progress. I call it greed." She returned her attention to the dog, successfully extracting a shard of glass. Buttercup whimpered but didn't pull away. "There, all better, girl." Will watched her bandage the paw with gentle efficiency, struck by the contradiction she presented. Her words were sharp as broken glass, but her touch was impossibly tender. Grace had been the same way, fierce when defending what mattered to her, soft as silk when caring for anything hurt or helpless. "You remind me of someone," he said before he could stop himself. Emily's hands stilled. "Yeah, someone you bulldozed out of their home." The words hit harder than they should have. "Someone I loved once, a long time ago." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment, her defensive walls lowered just enough for him to see the person beneath. Young, determined, but carrying a sadness that seemed too heavy for her shoulders. "What happened to her?" "She died." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "Car accident. I was 22. Emily's expression softened fractionally. "I'm sorry." "That must have been devastating." "It was." Will stood, brushing dirt from his $1,000 pants. "But life goes on. We adapt. We survive." "We do." She rose as well, gathering her first aid supplies. "But some things are worth fighting for, Mr. Hargrove." Some things shouldn't have to adapt or be buried under concrete and golf courses just because someone else thinks it's progress, and you think this farm is worth fighting for. Emily gestured toward the fields, the house, the mountains rising in the distance. My grandmother built a life here. She taught me that land isn't just dirt and grass. It's memory, it's connection, it's home. You can't put a price on that. Everyone has a price, Ms. Carter. Do you? She challenged, those green eyes blazing. What would it take for someone to buy your soul? The question caught him off guard. Once, he would have said his soul wasn't for sale. But somewhere along the way, in boardrooms and backroom deals, in the relentless pursuit of power and control, he'd lost track of what that soul had originally been worth. I should go, he said finally, but I'll be in town for the next few weeks, when you're ready to be reasonable. I'm the most reasonable person you'll ever meet, Emily interrupted. I'm just not for sale. She turned and walked toward the house, Buttercup limping beside her. At the porch steps, she paused. Mr. Hargrove, that woman you loved, would she want you to destroy other people's homes in her memory? The question hit like a physical blow. Will stood frozen in the yard, watching Emily disappear into the house, leaving him alone with the sunflowers and the ghosts of his past. Grace's voice echoed in his memory, crystal clear after all these years. Promise me something, Will. Promise me you'll never let the world make you hard. Promise me you'll always fight for the things that matter. He'd broken that promise so thoroughly, he'd forgotten he'd ever made it. As Will drove back toward town, Emily Carter's emerald eyes haunted his rearview mirror. She was going to be a problem, not just because she wouldn't sell, but because she reminded him of everything he'd lost, everything he'd chosen to bury under steel and concrete and the relentless pursuit of power. But problems were meant to be solved, and Will Hargrove had never met a problem he couldn't solve with enough time, money, and pressure, even if this particular problem had Grace's eyes and the unsettling ability to see straight through to his carefully guarded soul. That night, Will found himself standing on the hotel balcony with a glass of 25-year-old scotch, staring out at the light scattered across Hope Valley like fallen stars. Emily Carter's words echoed in his mind. Would she want you to destroy other people's homes in her memory? The scotch burned as he swallowed, but not as much as the memories that Emily's emerald eyes had awakened. He'd spent 28 years burying the past, but some graves weren't deep enough. Grace, summer 1996. Will had been working double shifts at Morrison's Hardware to save for college when he first saw her. Grace Whitaker, 19 years old with cascading auburn hair and those incredible green eyes, had walked into the store looking for paint to redo her bedroom. She'd been arguing with herself about colors, sage green or lavender, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd stopped Will's heart. "Excuse me," she'd said, catching him staring. "I'm having a color crisis. What do you think?" Will, who'd never given a thought to interior decorating in his life, had studied the paint samples with the seriousness of a doctoral thesis. "Sage green," he'd said finally. "It'll bring out your eyes." She'd blushed, a pink flush creeping up her neck. "That's either the sweetest thing anyone's ever said to me, or you're a really good salesman." "I'm a terrible salesman," Will had admitted. "Mrs. Morrison's always yelling at me for talking people out of buying things they don't need." Grace had laughed then, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Well then, I guess I'll trust your color advice." 2 hours later, Will had found himself helping her paint her bedroom, somehow having volunteered for the job without consciously deciding to do so. Grace had that effect on people. She drew them in like sunflowers following the light. "Tell me something," she'd said as they rolled sage green paint across her walls. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "An architect," Will had answered without hesitation. "I want to design buildings that matter, places where people can build lives, not just exist." "That's beautiful," Grace had said softly. "You want to create homes? What about you?" Grace had paused, paintbrush halfway to the wall. "I want to save things, old buildings, family farms, traditions that matter. I want to study historic preservation." She'd looked around the bedroom. Built in 1892, she'd told him proudly, "This house has seen 5 generations of my family. Every scratch on the floor, every creaky board. It's all part of our story. I can't imagine letting developers tear it down for a strip mall." Will had understood then why he'd been drawn to her so powerfully. They were opposite sides of the same coin. He wanted to build the future. She wanted to preserve the past. Together, they could create something beautiful. Will took another sip of scotch, the memory so vivid he could almost smell the sage green paint. They'd been inseparable after that day. Will, the poor scholarship kid studying engineering, Grace, the small-town girl with big dreams about preservation and history. Their friends had called them an odd couple, but it worked. God, how it had worked. They'd spent that whole summer together. Picnics by Miller's Creek, drives through the mountains, long conversations about everything and nothing. Grace had introduced him to her best friend Carmen, who'd treated Will like the son she'd never had. Carmen's little place had become their refuge. Sunflower fields stretching to the horizon, a kitchen that always smelled like fresh bread, and porch swings perfect for watching sunsets. "I love you," Grace had whispered one night in August as they lay in the sunflower field, stars scattered overhead like diamonds on black velvet. "I love your dreams. I love your ambition. I love the way you see the world like it's something you can actually fix. I love you too," Will had whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "And I'm going to marry you someday, build you a house with enough rooms for all the old furniture you're always rescuing, and a workshop where I can design buildings that'll stand for centuries." Grace had laughed, the sound floating across the sunflowers. "Promise. Promise." Will's hand tightened around the glass. He'd broken that promise in the most spectacular way possible. The fall semester had started, and with it, the pressure. Will's scholarship was academic-based, requiring him to maintain a 3.8 GPA while working part-time to cover living expenses. Grace was 2 hours away at State, studying historic preservation and throwing herself into student activism. They called every night, wrote letters, visited when they could afford gas money. But Will's older brother Rick had other plans. Richard "Rick" Hargrove was everything Will wasn't. Confident. Connected. Already climbing the corporate ladder at 26 while Will struggled with student loans and secondhand textbooks. Rick had come home for Thanksgiving that year with big plans for his little brother's future. "You're wasting your potential," Rick had said over dinner at their parents' modest house. "Architecture, historic preservation, that girlfriend of yours is filling your head with romantic nonsense about saving old buildings while the real money is in tearing them down and building new." "Grace isn't filling my head with anything," Will had protested. "I love what I'm studying." "Love doesn't pay the bills, little brother. I've got connections in real estate development, fast track to real money, real power, but you need to focus, and that means cutting distractions." "Grace isn't a distraction." Rick's expression had hardened. "She's a small-town girl with small-town dreams. Will, you think she's going to follow you to New York, Chicago? You think she's going to fit in with the kind of people you'll need to network with? I don't care about networking with." "You will," Rick had cut him off. "When you're eating ramen for the 5th night in a row because your scholarship doesn't cover everything, you'll care. When you watch your classmates land internships because their daddies made phone calls, you'll care. When Grace starts feeling guilty about holding you back from opportunities, you'll both care." Will remembered the seed of doubt Rick had planted that night. His brother had been relentless over Christmas break, pointing out every financial struggle, every missed opportunity, every way that Will's relationship with Grace was limiting his potential. But Grace had seemed different when she came home for winter break. Quieter, more withdrawn. She'd started conversations and then stopped mid-sentence, as if she'd forgotten what she wanted to say. "Is everything okay?" Will had asked one evening as they sat in Carmen's kitchen, hot chocolate growing cold between them. "Of course," Grace had said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired from finals." Carmen had watched them both with worried eyes. But when Will had asked her privately if something was wrong, she'd just shaken her head and changed the subject. It wasn't until later, much later, that Will would understand the shadows he'd seen in Grace's green eyes. The fear, the worry, the way she'd started checking over her shoulder when they walked through town together. Someone had been threatening her. Someone who wanted Will to focus on his bright future, without the anchor of small-town love holding him back. Will's phone buzzed, jerking him back to the present. A text from Marcus. "Sir, the Portland investors moved the call to 8 a.m. tomorrow. Shall I confirm?" "Confirm," Will typed back, then stared at the screen. The Portland investors wanted to put money into the Hope Valley project. Big money. The kind of money that would make this development one of the largest in the region. The kind of money Grace would have hated. But Grace was dead. Had been dead for 28 years. Killed in a car accident 3 days before Valentine's Day, 1997. Will had been cramming for midterms when Carmen called, her voice broken with grief. "She's gone, Will. Our Grace is gone." Will had driven through a blizzard to get to Hope Valley. Had stood in the cemetery as they lowered Grace's casket into frozen ground. Had numbly accepted condolences from people who kept saying things like, "God needed another angel," and "She's in a better place now." Rick had driven down for the funeral. Had stayed an extra week to help Will through the grief. But mostly, Rick had talked about the future, about opportunities, about how staying in Hope Valley would only make the pain worse. "The best thing you can do," Rick had said as they packed up Will's dorm room, "is start fresh somewhere else. Make something of yourself. Honor Grace's memory by becoming the success she always believed you could be." So Will had transferred to Columbia, had taken Rick's connections and run with them, had thrown himself into real estate development with the single-minded focus of someone trying to outrun his own heartbreak. And it had worked. By 30, he was worth millions. By 40, billions. He'd built an empire on the foundation of his grief, telling himself that every skyscraper, every shopping center, every luxury development was proof that Grace hadn't died in vain, that her faith in him had meant something. But now, standing on this hotel balcony in the town where it all began, Will wondered if he'd gotten it all wrong, if instead of honoring Grace's memory, he'd been systematically destroying everything she'd ever cared about. Emily Carter's voice whispered through his mind again. Would she want you to destroy other people's homes in her memory? The answer, Will realized with painful clarity, was no. Grace wouldn't want this. She'd be horrified by what he'd become, by the homes he'd demolished, by the communities he'd displaced in the name of progress and profit. But it was too late to change course now. Too many investors, too many contracts, too many people depending on the Hope Valley project. And if he was honest with himself, he wasn't sure he remembered how to be the man Grace had fallen in love with. That man had died with her in a car accident 28 years ago. Hadn't he? Emily Carter stood in the doorway of what had been Carmen's bedroom, morning sunlight streaming through lace curtains that her grandmother had hung decades ago. 6 months had passed since Carmen's death, but Emily still couldn't bring herself to change anything in this room. The faded photographs on the dresser, the hand-stitched quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the small wooden jewelry box that played Amazing Grace when opened. It all felt too sacred to disturb, but the farm's finances were becoming impossible to ignore, and Emily knew she'd have to start going through Carmen's papers eventually. The meeting with William Hargrove yesterday had only reinforced how precarious her situation really was. The man had money, power, and apparently the backing of half the town. All Emily had was stubbornness, and a deep-seated belief that some things shouldn't be for sale. Mija, Carmen's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. Emily pulled open the top drawer of Carmen's antique desk, expecting to find the usual collection of receipts, bank statements, and grocery lists. Instead, her fingers found something unexpected. A small brass key attached to a faded ribbon. The key was ornate, clearly old, with delicate engravings that caught the morning light. She'd never seen it before, which was odd. Emily had lived with Carmen since she was 3 months old, and she thought she knew every corner of this house. Carmen had never been one for secrets or hidden things. Everything about her had been open, honest, uncomplicated, or so Emily had thought. Curious, she continued searching through the desk drawers. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old seed catalogs, she found a manila envelope with her name written on it in Carmen's careful script. For Emily, when she's ready to know the truth. Emily's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were more papers than she'd expected. Birth certificates, hospital records, legal documents, and at the bottom, a letter in Carmen's handwriting, dated just a month before her death. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're dealing with the aftermath of my cowardice. I should have told you the truth years ago, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave. Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid the past would hurt you the way it hurt your mother. You weren't abandoned, Mija. You were hidden, protected. Your mother, Grace Whitaker, was my best friend, and she loved you more than life itself when she died in that car accident when you were just 2 months old. She made me promise to keep you safe, to raise you as my own, to never let anyone know who your real parents were. There are things about that accident that were never made public, things Grace discovered before she died, things that put her in danger, and by extension, put you in danger. I've kept those secrets for 27 years, but now I'm old and sick, and I'm terrified of what might happen if the wrong people figure out who you really are. Your father is still alive, Emily. His name is William Hargrove, and he never knew about you. Grace died before she could tell him she was pregnant. I wanted to reach out to him after the funeral, but Grace had made me promise to only reveal the truth if you were ever in real danger. I think that time might be coming. There's been talk in town about development, about outside investors. If it's who I think it might be, if it's connected to the Hargrove family, then you need to know everything. The brass key will open a trunk in the barn loft. Everything Grace wanted your father to know is in there. Read it all, mija, then decide for yourself what to do with the truth. I love you as if you were my own blood, because in every way that matters, you are, always. Carmen Emily stared at the letter until the words blurred together. Her hands shook so violently she had to set the paper down on the desk. Grace Whitaker, William Hargrove, the man who'd stood in her yard yesterday, who'd looked at her with those haunted gray eyes and said she reminded him of someone he'd loved, someone I loved once, a long time ago. She died. Car accident. I was 22. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. The way he'd stared at her, the catch in his voice when he'd mentioned the accident, the age difference that would make him exactly the right age to have been her father. 27 years ago, Emily ran from the house to the barn, taking the loft stairs 2 at a time. The key fit perfectly into an old steamer trunk she'd noticed 1,000 times but never thought to open. Carmen had always said it contained old memories. Emily had assumed she meant photographs or clothes. The trunk opened with a soft creak, releasing the scent of lavender and old paper. Inside, Emily found a treasure trove of memories that weren't Carmen's at all. Love letters written in a young man's careful handwriting. My dearest Grace, I can't stop thinking about our conversation yesterday about building something beautiful together. Photographs of a young couple that took Emily's breath away. The woman had Emily's exact face, just with auburn hair instead of blonde. The man was unmistakably a younger version of William Hargrove. Same gray eyes, same strong jaw, but with an openness and joy that was completely absent from the hardened businessman she'd met yesterday. Emily found report cards from something called Hope Valley Elementary, with Grace Whitaker's name at the top, a high school diploma, acceptance letters to colleges, and then, tucked between the pages of what looked like a journal, she found medical records from the Hope Valley Clinic, prenatal appointment confirmations, ultrasound images, a positive pregnancy test with a date that made Emily's heart stop, September 15th, 1996. If the dates were correct, Grace had found out she was pregnant just a few months into her relationship with Will. But the most devastating discovery was a manila folder marked Insurance Investigation in official-looking print. Inside were police reports, witness statements, and photographs from the accident scene. Emily had to stop reading several times, overwhelmed by the clinical descriptions of her mother's death, but one detail kept jumping out at her. Multiple witnesses reported that Grace's car had been acting strangely in the days before the accident, grinding brakes, steering that pulled to one side. The mechanic who'd examined the wreckage noted that the brake lines appeared to have been tampered with, but the investigation had been closed abruptly when Grace's insurance company settled the claim without admitting fault. Someone had killed her mother, and that someone had let Emily's father believe it was just a tragic accident for 28 years. Emily sank to the barn floor, surrounded by the remnants of a love story that had been cut short by violence. Her hands found a final letter, this one addressed to Will but never sent. My darling Will, I'm writing this because I'm scared and I don't know who else to trust. Someone has been calling me, threatening me, telling me to stay away from you. They say I'm holding you back from your potential, that I'm going to ruin your future. I found out yesterday that I'm pregnant. I want to tell you in person, but I'm afraid. Not of you, never of you, but of whoever is doing this. They seem to know everything about us, about our plans, about our dreams. If something happens to me, Please know that this baby was wanted and loved from the moment I knew about her. I have a feeling it's a girl. Call it mother's intuition. Promise me you'll find her and tell her about us, about how much we loved each other, about the life we plan to build together. I'm going to give this letter to Carmen for safekeeping if you're reading it. Then my worst fears have come true. But please don't let whoever did this destroy what we had. Love is stronger than fear. Will, it has to be. Forever yours. Grace. Emily was crying now, tears falling onto her mother's words. Grace had known she was in danger. She'd known someone wanted to separate her from Will, and she'd tried to protect both her unborn daughter and the man she loved. But she'd failed. Whoever had threatened her had followed through on their promise. And Emily's father had spent 28 years believing the woman he loved had died in a random accident. A sound from below made Emily look up. Through the barn window, she could see a black SUV pulling into her driveway. Not Will's Bentley this time, but something more utilitarian. A man got out, older than Will, with silver hair and a face that radiated authority. He looked around the property with the calculating gaze of someone pricing real estate. Emily quickly gathered all the papers and photographs, stuffing them back into the trunk. Whatever secrets this contained, whoever had killed her mother, she wasn't ready to trust anyone else with the truth. Not yet. But as she watched the stranger approach her front door, Emily realized that Carmen had been right about one thing. The past was catching up with them, and the danger that had taken Grace's life might not be finished with the Whitaker family. The man knocked on her door with sharp, authoritative raps. Emily took a deep breath, locked the trunk, and headed down from the loft. She had a feeling her quiet life in Hope Valley was about to get very complicated. And somewhere in town, her father had no idea that his daughter was about to learn the truth about everything he'd lost. Emily's hands were still shaking from her discovery in the trunk when she heard the sharp knock at her front door. She climbed down from the barn loft as quietly as possible, her mind reeling from everything she'd just learned. Grace Whitaker. William Hargrove. A murdered mother and a father who'd never known she existed. Through the kitchen window, she could see the man more clearly now. Late 50s, expensive suit, silver hair perfectly styled despite the morning humidity. Everything about him screamed corporate authority, but there was something else in his bearing, something predatory. Emily wiped her eyes quickly and opened the door, keeping her expression neutral. "Can I help you, Miss Carter?" His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm Richard Hargrove, senior partner at Hargrove Development. I believe you met my younger brother yesterday." Brother? Emily's blood turned to ice. This was Will's older brother, and according to the insurance files she'd just read, someone in the Hargrove family had known about the threats Grace received before her death. Someone had wanted Grace out of Will's life badly enough to kill for it. "Mr. Hargrove," Emily kept her voice steady. "What can I do for you?" "May I come in? I think we have a lot to discuss about your property situation." Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door in his face. But Emily needed information. She needed to understand what she was dealing with. "Of course. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely." Richard followed her into the kitchen, his eyes cataloging everything. The vintage appliances, the handmade curtains, the family photographs on the refrigerator. Emily noticed he lingered on a picture of her and Carmen at last year's Sunflower Festival. "Beautiful home," he said, settling into a chair at Carmen's old wooden table. "These old farmhouses have such character. Of course, maintaining them can be quite expensive." Emily poured coffee with hands that she willed not to tremble. "Carmen took good care of it. I plan to do the same." "Carmen Delgado, yes. I remember her from years ago, sweet woman. She helped care for a lot of people in this community." Richard's tone was casual, but Emily caught the undertone of assessment. "I was sorry to hear about her passing. Cancer, wasn't it?" "Pancreatic." Emily sat across from him, cradling her mug like a shield. "It was very quick. A blessing, in a way. Long illnesses can be so difficult for families." Richard sipped his coffee, studying her face. "You know, you look familiar. Have we met before?" Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. Was he fishing? Or did he actually recognize something in her features? "I don't think so. I rarely leave Hope Valley." Perhaps you remind me of someone." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, about your property, I understand my brother made you an offer yesterday." He did. I declined. Yes, Will mentioned that. He also mentioned that you seemed upset by his visit. I hope he wasn't too forward in his approach. Will can be quite intense when he wants something. Emily chose her words carefully. Your brother was perfectly professional. I simply have no interest in selling. Of course. Sentimental attachment is understandable. But Miss Carter, may I speak frankly? Richard leaned forward, his expression becoming earnest. This development is happening whether you participate or not. We have 93% of the land already under contract. Your small parcel, while lovely, will be completely surrounded by construction for the next 2 years. I can live with construction noise. It's not just noise, I'm afraid. Construction vehicles using the access roads, dust, disrupted utilities, changed drainage patterns that could affect your well water. Richard spread his hands apologetically. I've seen this before. Holdout properties become uninhabitable during major developments like this. Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. That sounds almost like a threat, Mr. Hargrove. Oh, not at all. Richard's laugh was practiced, smooth. Simply the unfortunate reality of large-scale construction. I'm trying to save you from a very unpleasant 2 years, Ms. Carter, and the financial loss that comes with owning unusable property. The land has been in my family for 60 years. It'll still be here when your construction is finished. Will it? Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Forgive me, but I did some research on your property before coming here. You're not actually family. Are you? Carmen Delgado adopted you as an infant. Your birth parents are unknown. Emily's mouth went dry. Carmen was the only family I needed. I'm sure she was wonderful, but legally speaking, you have no blood claim to this land. And Carmen's will, while valid, might be challengeable under certain circumstances, especially if questions arose about your guardianship papers from infancy. The threat was clear now, wrapped in corporate doublespeak. Richard was suggesting he could challenge her legal right to the property. Emily thought about the papers hidden in the barn trunk. Her real birth certificate, hospital records proving her parentage, evidence that could either protect her or put her in more danger, depending on who found out about it. I think you should leave, Emily said quietly. Ms. Carter, please don't misunderstand me. I'm trying to help you avoid a very messy legal situation. The generous offer we're making could set you up for life. You could buy a beautiful home anywhere in the country, start fresh without the burden of maintaining this old place. This is my home, is it? Richard's voice dropped, becoming almost intimate. Or is it just the place where you've been hiding? The words hit like a physical blow. Emily stood abruptly, coffee sloshing from her mug. I think we're done here. Richard remained seated, finishing his coffee with maddening calm. You know, you really do remind me of someone. A girl I knew many years ago, Grace Whitaker. Do you know that name? Emily's world tilted. He knew somehow. Richard Hargrove knew exactly who she was. No. Lovely girl. She and my brother Will were quite the item back in the day. Tragic what happened to her. Richard's eyes never left Emily's face. Car accident. Such a waste of young life. I wouldn't know anything about that. Of course not. You were just a baby then, if you existed at all. Richard stood slowly, straightening his tie. But sometimes the past has a way of catching up with us, doesn't it? Sometimes secrets that were buried deep have a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient times. Emily walked to the front door and held it open. Goodbye. Mr. Hargrove? Richard paused on the threshold. Think about what I've said, Miss Carter. The easy way is always preferable to the hard way and family secrets. Well, they can be very dangerous things when they fall into the wrong hands. Emily slammed the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart racing. Through the window, she watched him drive away, but she had no doubt he'd be back. The conversation had been a warning, a demonstration of power. Richard knew who she was, and he was prepared to use that knowledge as a weapon. She needed to talk to Will. Her father, the thought still felt surreal, but there was no denying the truth now. Will Hargrove was her father, and his own brother was threatening her to get control of Carmen's land. But why? What was so important about this specific property that Richard would risk exposure after 28 years? And more terrifying, if Richard was willing to threaten her now, had he been the one who'd killed Grace all those years ago? Emily looked toward the barn where the trunk held all her mother's secrets. Whatever game Richard was playing, She was now a central piece, but she wasn't the helpless infant Grace had died protecting. She was 27 years old. She knew the truth, and she had something Richard didn't know she possessed. Evidence, the question was. Would it be enough to finally get justice for her mother? Or would it just make her the next target? One thing was certain. She couldn't face this alone. It was time to tell Will Hargrove that his daughter was alive, and that his brother might be a murderer. But first, she needed to make sure the evidence would survive if something happened to her. Will was reviewing architectural plans in his hotel suite when his phone buzzed with an unknown local number. He almost ignored it. Marcus screened most of his calls, but something made him answer. "Mr. Hargrove." Emily Carter's voice was different than yesterday. Strained, urgent. "I need to see you today. It's about Grace Whitaker." Will's blood turned to ice. He hadn't mentioned Grace's name to Emily yesterday, only that he'd lost someone he loved. "How do you know that name? Please, can you come to the farm? There's something you need to see. Something Carmen left for you." "Emily, I don't understand." "Your brother was here this morning." Her voice cracked slightly. "Richard, he knows, Mr. Hargrove. He knows everything." The phone went dead. Will stared at it for a long moment, his mind racing. Rick knew what. How was Emily connected to Grace? And why was she asking him to come alone to discuss a woman who'd been dead for 28 years? Against every business instinct he'd developed, Will found himself driving back to the Carter farm. The sunflower fields looked different in the afternoon light. More golden, more alive, like the summers he'd spent here with Grace. When the world had seemed full of infinite possibility, Emily was waiting for him on the front porch, clutching what looked like an old manila envelope. Her face was pale, her green eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. When she stood to greet him, Will noticed her hands were shaking. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Emily, what's this about? How do you know Grace's name?" Instead of answering, she gestured toward the barn. "There's something I need to show you first." In the loft, Will followed her across the yard, his confusion growing with every step. The barn was exactly as he remembered it. Weathered red wood, the sweet smell of hay, sunlight streaming through gaps between the boards. Grace had loved this barn. She'd helped Carmen store the sunflower harvest here every fall, laughing as golden petals caught in her auburn hair. Emily led him up the narrow stairs to the loft, where an old steamer trunk sat open beneath a dusty window. Will's breath caught as he saw what was inside. My God. He dropped to his knees beside the trunk, recognizing his own handwriting on letters he'd written 30 years ago. "How did you get these?" "Carmen saved everything." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "She told me Grace was her best friend, but she never told me." Emily stopped, tears threatening to spill over. Will picked up one of the letters, his hands trembling as he recognized his younger self's careful script. "My dearest Grace, every moment away from you feels like an eternity. I can't wait to build our life together. I don't understand," he said hoarsely. "Why would Carmen have these? Why would she give them to you?" Emily sat down beside him, pulling the manila envelope to her chest like armor. "Because Grace was my mother." The words hit Will like a physical blow. He stared at Emily's face, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not just Grace's eyes, but the shape of her nose, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when nervous. Features he'd dismissed as coincidence yesterday now screamed the impossible truth. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Grace died in February. You're 27. The timeline doesn't. Grace was pregnant when she died." Emily's voice broke. 2 months pregnant. She never got the chance to tell you. Will's world tilted sideways. Grace had been pregnant, with his child. This child. The woman sitting beside him, who'd challenged him yesterday about destroying homes, who'd looked at him with defiant green eyes, and asked if his lost love would approve of what he'd become. His daughter. "Show me," he said roughly. "Show me everything." Emily opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside were hospital records, ultrasound images, and at the bottom, a letter addressed to him in Grace's familiar handwriting. Will's name was written on the envelope in her careful script, but the letter had clearly never been sent. "Carmen found this after Grace died," Emily explained. "Grace had given it to her for safekeeping, with instructions to only give it to you if something happened to her. Will took the letter with hands that felt disconnected from his body. Grace's words swam before his eyes as he read, "My darling Will, I'm writing this because I'm scared and I don't know who else to trust. Someone has been calling me, threatening me, telling me to stay away from you. They say I'm holding you back from your potential, that I'm going to ruin your future. I found out yesterday that I'm pregnant. I want to tell you in person, but I'm afraid, not of you, never of you, but of whoever is doing this. They seem to know everything about us, about our plans, about our dreams." Will stopped reading, his vision blurring. Someone was threatening her. "Keep reading," Emily said gently. "If something happens to me, please know that this baby was wanted and loved from the moment I knew about her. I have a feeling it's a girl. Call it mother's intuition. Promise me you'll find her and tell her about us, about how much we loved each other, about the life we plan to build together. I'm going to give this letter to Carmen for safekeeping. If you're reading it, then my worst fears have come true. But please don't let whoever did this destroy what we had. Love is stronger than fear. Will. It has to be. Forever yours. Grace P.I.'s. I've named her Emily Grace. If she inherits your stubborn streak and my love of old things, Carmen's going to have her hands full." Will looked up at Emily through tears he didn't remember shedding. "Emily Grace." She nodded, crying now too. "Carmen called me Emily Grace until I started school, then just Emily, to keep things simple. Someone killed her." Will's voice was raw with 28 years of suppressed grief and new rage. "Someone murdered Grace to get her away from me. And I never knew. I spent all these years thinking it was just a random accident. There's more." Emily pulled out the police reports and insurance investigation files. Carmen kept everything. The brake lines were cut. Will, someone sabotaged her car. And the investigation was shut down before they could find out who. Will read through the reports with growing horror. The mechanic's notes about tampered brake lines. Witness statements about Grace's car acting strangely in the days before the accident. Insurance company records showing a suspiciously quick settlement that ended the police investigation. 28 years, he whispered. "You've been alive for 28 years. And I never knew. Carmen was protecting me. She said Grace made her promise to keep me safe, to never let anyone know who my real parents were unless I was in danger. And now you're in danger." Will thought about Rick's visit this morning, his brother's casual mention of researching Emily's background. "What did Rick say to you?" Emily recounted the conversation, including Rick's thinly veiled threats about challenging her ownership of the property and his knowledge of Grace's name. With each detail, Will's fury grew. His brother, his own brother, had known about the threats Grace received, had known about the pregnancy, had possibly been behind all of it. "Rick always said Grace was holding me back," Will said slowly, pieces clicking together. "He kept pushing me to focus on my career, to cut distractions. He said she was too small town for my potential." "Will," Emily's voice was gentle. "Careful. Carmen told me she always suspected someone in your family was involved. She said Rick called her after the funeral, asking if Grace had left anything behind, any letters or papers. And Carmen never told me about you, because she thought I might be involved too." Emily nodded. "She waited 27 years to see what kind of man you'd become. Yesterday, when you showed up here trying to buy my land, she probably would have taken her secrets to the grave. But Rick's threats changed that. Carmen left me a letter before she died. She said if the wrong people ever figured out who I was, I'd need to know the truth to protect myself." Will stared at his daughter. The words still felt surreal but absolutely right, and felt something crack open in his chest. For 28 years, he'd built his empire on the foundation of losing Grace, but he hadn't lost everything. He'd gained something precious beyond measure, something he'd never even known existed. "Emily," his voice broke on her name. "My daughter." She launched herself into his arms then, and Will held her tight, breathing in the scent of sunflowers and sunshine that clung to her hair. She felt small and strong and real, and for the first time in 3 decades, Will understood what he'd been missing. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't protect you or Grace. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. You're here now," Emily whispered back. "That's what matters." But even as they held each other, Will's mind was already racing ahead to the confrontation that was coming. Rick had killed Grace and stolen 28 years of Will's life with his daughter. It was time to make his brother pay for what he'd done. Will held his daughter for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. 28 years of lost time compressed into a single embrace. When they finally pulled apart, Emily's green eyes, Grace's eyes, were bright with tears, but there was something else there too. Determination, strength, the same fierce protectiveness that Grace had shown when defending things that mattered to her. "We need to talk about what happens next," Emily said, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Rick isn't going to just disappear because we know the truth." Will nodded, his mind already shifting into the strategic mode that had built his empire. But this wasn't business. This was family. This was justice for Grace and protection for the daughter he'd just found. "Tell me about the documents Carmen saved," he said. "Everything. We need to understand exactly what evidence we have." Emily led him through the contents of the trunk piece by piece. Birth certificates. Both the false one listing Carmen as her guardian and the real one with Grace and Will's names. Hospital records from Grace's prenatal appointments. The insurance investigation files with their damning conclusions about sabotage. And most crucially, a small tape recorder that Carmen had apparently hidden in her purse during a phone call with Rick 3 days after Grace's funeral. Carmen recorded this. Will stared at the ancient device. "She told me she always suspected Rick was involved, but she needed proof. She said he called asking about Grace's personal effects, and something in his voice made her nervous." Emily pressed play. Rick's voice filled the barn loft. Younger, but unmistakably him. "Carmen, I know this is a difficult time, but I need to ask about Grace's personal belongings. Did she leave any letters, journals, anything that might upset Will further?" Carmen's voice, steady but cautious. "Just some photographs and keepsakes. Nothing that would upset anyone." "That's good." Will is finally starting to move forward. Getting away from Hope Valley, focusing on his future. It would be tragic if something dragged him back into the past. "What kind of something, Rick?" A pause. Then, "Oh, you know how grief works. Sometimes people imagine connections that aren't there, see meaning in random coincidences." Will mentioned that Grace had been acting strangely before the accident. Paranoid, worried about things that probably weren't real. I'd hate for any of that delusion to surface and set back his healing. Grace wasn't paranoid or delusional. Another pause. Longer this time. "Of course not. I just meant, well, sometimes when people are under stress, they imagine threats that don't exist. Create dramatic narratives to make sense of senseless tragedies. I'm sure you understand." The recording ended there, but the threat was clear. Rick was warning Carmen not to mention Grace's fears about being followed or threatened. He was painting Grace as unstable, paranoid, delusional, setting up a narrative that would discredit any posthumous claims about murder. "Carmen kept this for 28 years, Will said quietly. "She knew. She suspected, but she couldn't prove it without putting me in danger." Emily rewound the tape. Rick all but admitted he knew about the threats Grace was receiving, and the way he talks about Will moving forward and focusing on his future. "It sounds like he orchestrated your leaving Hope Valley." Will thought back to those weeks after Grace's funeral. Rick staying longer than necessary, constantly talking about fresh starts and new opportunities. The job offer at the Columbia development firm that Rick had arranged, the apartment Rick had helped him find, the way his brother had systematically disconnected him from everyone and everything in Hope Valley. He didn't just kill Grace, Will realized. He stole my entire life. 28 years of knowing you, of honoring Grace's memory properly, of understanding what really happened. He made me complicit in forgetting her. Emily touched his arm gently. "You didn't forget her. You built your whole career trying to fill the hole she left. I built my career destroying the things she loved, historic buildings, family farms, communities with roots going back generations." Will's voice was bitter. "Rick convinced me that success was the best way to honor her memory, but Grace would have hated everything I've become. Would she?" Emily pulled out one of Grace's journals from the trunk. "Listen to this." She flipped to a page marked with a pressed sunflower and read, "Will has such big dreams about changing the world through architecture. He wants to build beautiful things that will last for centuries, places where families can put down roots and grow. Sometimes I think he doesn't realize how much good he could do if he just trusted his instincts instead of listening to people who think profit is more important than purpose. Will felt something shift in his chest. She believed in me. She believed in the man you could become, the man you still can become. Emily closed the journal. But first, we have to deal with Rick. What exactly did he threaten you with this morning? Emily recounted the conversation in detail. Rick's knowledge of her adoption, his threats to challenge her legal claim to the property, his obvious recognition of her resemblance to Grace. The more she talked, the clearer it became that Rick wasn't just trying to acquire the land. He was trying to eliminate the last living connection to Grace Whitaker. He's planning something, Will said grimly. The question is whether he's working alone or if he has others involved. Others. The insurance investigation was shut down very quickly. Someone with influence made that happen. Rick was ambitious, but he was only 26 when Grace died. He wouldn't have had the connections to bury a murder investigation on his own. Emily paled. You think there's a conspiracy? I think Rick had help, and I think that help is still out there. Which means going to the police with this evidence might not be enough to protect you. Will stood, pacing the small loft. We need to be smart about this. Strategic. What are you thinking? Will's mind was racing through possibilities, contingencies, the kind of complex maneuvering that had made him billions. But this time, he wasn't playing for money or market share. He was playing for his daughter's life. Rick doesn't know that we know about each other, he said slowly. As far as he's concerned, you're just a stubborn farm girl standing in the way of his development project, and I'm his business partner who might be getting emotionally compromised by your resemblance to Grace. So we use that. Exactly. I'm going to confront him, but not about murder, about the development. I'll tell him I'm having second thoughts about the project, that something about Hope Valley is making me reconsider our approach. And meanwhile, you make copies of everything in this trunk and hide them somewhere Rick can't find them. If something happens to us, if this evidence disappears, there needs to be a backup plan. Emily nodded. What about the original police investigation? Could there be other evidence that was buried? I'll have my legal team look into it quietly, and I'll start reaching out to contacts in the state attorney general's office. Rick might have been able to buy off local investigators 28 years ago, but murder has no statute of limitations. They spent the next hour organizing the evidence, making detailed plans. Will watched his daughter work, methodical, thorough, fearless. Despite the danger they both faced, she had Grace's courage and his strategic mind, and for the first time since learning the truth, Will felt a flicker of hope. Emily, he said, as they prepared to leave the barn, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with Rick, regardless of what comes next, finding you is the best thing that's happened to me in 28 years. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It lit up her entire face and made her look so much like Grace that Will's heart ached. I'm glad Carmen finally told me the truth. I'm glad you came back to Hope Valley. Even though I'm trying to bulldoze your home. You're not anymore, are you? Will looked around the barn loft, where he'd just discovered he had a daughter, where Grace's love letters were scattered like fallen leaves, where 28 years of lies were finally crumbling into truth. No, he said firmly. I'm not. This land stays in the family. Our family. Emily threw her arms around him again, and Will held her tight, making a silent promise to Grace's memory. He would protect their daughter. He would get justice for Grace's murder. And he would make sure Rick paid for every single day of happiness he'd stolen from them. The battle was just beginning, but Will Hargrove had never lost a fight that truly mattered to him. And nothing had ever mattered more than this. That evening, Will found Rick in the hotel bar, nursing a scotch and scrolling through his phone with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he held all the cards. The sight of his brother, older now, silver-haired and successful, but still carrying that same arrogant confidence, filled Will with a rage so pure it took every ounce of self-control not to grab Rick by the throat and demand answers. Instead, Will ordered his own drink and sat down across from his brother, keeping his expression neutral. Rick, working late? Always. Rick looked up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just coordinating with the construction teams, we should be able to break ground within 6 weeks, assuming we resolve the Carter situation. About that, Will took a sip of his whiskey, letting the burn center him. I think we need to reconsider our approach. Rick's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh, having second thoughts about progress, little brother. The condescending tone was exactly the same as it had been 28 years ago. Rick talking down to him, positioning himself as the wise older brother guiding Will's decisions, the tone that had convinced Will to leave Hope Valley, to bury his grief and ambition, to forget everything Grace had meant to him. I'm having second thoughts about bulldozing an entire community for a golf course, Will said carefully. There might be ways to develop the land that preserves some of the existing structures, historic buildings, family farms, that sort of thing. Rick's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Since when do you care about historic preservation? Since I learned my daughter is living in the farmhouse where her mother was raised. Since I realized there might be value in maintaining the area's character. Authenticity is big with luxury travelers these days. Will. Rick leaned forward, his voice taking on that familiar, patronizing quality. We've been through this. Sentiment is expensive. Keeping old buildings means retrofitting, compliance issues, maintenance costs that eat into profit margins. Clean slate development is always more efficient. More efficient for who? For everyone, for the investors, for the bottom line, for the local economy. These people will have more money than they've ever seen in their lives. They can buy better homes anywhere they want. Will studied his brother's face, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition. Did Rick remember Grace at all? Did he ever think about the young woman he'd murdered to clear the path for Will's success? What if some of them don't want to leave? Will asked. What if their connection to the land runs deeper than money? Rick's laugh was sharp, dismissive. Deeper than money, Will. These are farmers and small business owners living paycheck to paycheck. Nobody's connection to anything runs deeper than financial security. You sound like you speak from experience. I speak from 30 years in development. People always claim their land is priceless right up until you write a big enough check. Rick finished his scotch. Take that, Carter girl. She's playing hardball now, but she'll come around. They always do. And if she doesn't, Rick's smile turned cold. Then she'll discover that being the lone holdout in a major development isn't as romantic as it sounds in the movies. Construction accidents happen. Utility lines get disrupted. Property values plummet when you're surrounded by active construction sites. Will felt his jaw clench. That sounds like a threat. It's reality, economics, market forces. Rick signaled the bartender for another drink. Sometimes people need help understanding their best interests. The way Grace Whitaker needed help understanding hers. The words slipped out before Will could stop them. Rick went very still, his hand frozen halfway to his glass. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, and Will realized he'd just blown his cover. What did you say? Rick's voice was deadly quiet. There was no going back now. Will leaned forward, letting his rage show for the first time. I said, the way Grace Whitaker needed help understanding her best interests. Before her car accident, Rick's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, calculation, and finally, resignation. You know, I know everything. Will's voice was steel. I know you killed her, I know why, and I know about Emily. Emily, Rick said the name like it tasted bitter. So Carmen finally told you the truth. I wondered if she would eventually. Carmen's dead, Emily told me herself. Rick laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course she did. Grace's daughter, raised by Grace's best friend, living on Grace's favorite property. The universe has quite a sense of irony. You've known who she was this entire time. I suspected when I first saw her photo in the property files, the resemblance is striking, but I wasn't certain until this morning when I met her in person. Rick picked up his fresh drink. Those eyes are unmistakable. Will wanted to reach across the table and strangle his brother with his bare hands. You killed the woman I loved. You stole 28 years of my life with my daughter, and you're sitting here talking about it like it's a business transaction. It was a business transaction. Rick's tone was matter of fact. Grace was a liability, Will. She was going to drag you down, keep you small, tie you to this backwards little town forever. I did what needed to be done to protect your future. Protect my future. Will's voice rose, and several other patrons glanced their way. He forced himself to lower it. You murdered an innocent woman. I eliminated an obstacle. Do you have any idea where you'd be right now if I hadn't intervened? You'd be a small-town architect designing strip malls and subdivisions, married to a woman who collected antiques and grew flowers. You'd be nobody. I'd be happy. You'd be poor and insignificant. Instead, you're worth $15 billion. You own skyscrapers in Manhattan, resorts in the Caribbean, development projects on 3 continents. Everything you have, everything you've accomplished, exists because I had the vision to see your potential and the courage to remove what was holding you back. Will stared at his brother in horrified fascination. Rick genuinely believed he'd done Will a favor. 28 years later, he showed no remorse. No recognition that murder was wrong. He'd killed Grace the way someone might remove a splinter, a minor inconvenience that required decisive action. How? Will asked quietly. How did you do it? Rick shrugged. Brake lines. Simple. Effective. Looked like mechanical failure. Grace had been driving that old car for years. Everyone knew it was falling apart. The insurance investigator was a friend of mine from college. He made sure the case didn't get too much scrutiny. And the threats she was receiving. Anonymous phone calls. I told her she was ruining your chances at a real future, that she should break up with you for your own good. When that didn't work, I escalated the pressure. Rick's tone was clinical, detached. She was stronger than I expected. Most people would have run after the first few calls. She was pregnant, for the first time. Rick's composure cracked slightly. I didn't know that until after. If I had, he paused, seeming to consider, it wouldn't have changed anything. If anything, it would have made the situation more urgent. A baby would have tied you to her permanently. Will felt something break inside his chest. You would have killed your own niece. I would have prevented a mistake that would have destroyed your potential before it could be realized. Rick finished his drink and stood. And now, 28 years later, I'm going to finish what I started. If you touch Emily, I don't have to touch her. I just have to make her understand that fighting me is pointless. Rick straightened his tie. You see, Will, while you've been playing happy families in that barn, I've been making phone calls. The State Environmental Agency received an anonymous tip about potential contamination at the Carter property. They'll be out tomorrow for soil testing. Amazing how these old farms sometimes have buried drums of pesticides that leak into groundwater. Will's blood ran cold. You're framing her. I'm removing an obstacle. Again, Emily Carter will discover that fighting Hargrove development is very expensive and very dangerous. She'll sell, or she'll find herself facing environmental cleanup costs that will bankrupt her and legal troubles that could land her in prison. I won't let you. You won't stop me. Rick's voice was flat, final. Because if you try, if you go to the police with your little collection of evidence, Emily won't live long enough to testify. Grace's death will look like an accident compared to what happens to her daughter. Rick walked away, leaving Will sitting alone at the bar with the taste of ash in his mouth. His brother wasn't just a murderer. He was a sociopath who saw people as chess pieces to be moved or removed as necessary. And now he was targeting Emily with the same cold calculation he'd used to destroy Grace. Will pulled out his phone and dialed Emily's number. She answered on the second ring. Emily, you need to leave the farm. Tonight. Right now. What happened? Rick knows everything. And he's coming for you next. Will could hear the fear in her voice when she responded, but also something else. The same fierce determination that Grace had shown when defending the things she loved. Let him come, Emily said quietly. I'm not running. And neither are you. Emily, we end this, Will. Together, for Grace, and for us, and for everyone else Rick has destroyed along the way. The line went dead, and Will sat staring at his phone, torn between terror for his daughter's safety and pride in her courage. She was Grace's daughter, all right, and she was his. It was time to finish what Rick had started 28 years ago. Will raced through the night toward Emily's farm, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with Marcus and his security team. But when he arrived, he found Emily calmly loading boxes into her pickup truck by the light of the porch lamp, Buttercup sitting alert beside her. Emily, we need to go now. She looked up, her green eyes blazing with determination. I'm not running. Will, I'm preparing. Rick threatened to kill you. This isn't the time for what? For standing up to a murderer. Emily hefted another box into the truck bed. These are copies of all the evidence, Carmen's recordings, the insurance files, Grace's letters. Everything. I'm taking them to 3 different locations. The bank, my lawyer, and Father Martinez at the church. Will grabbed her arm gently. Emily, you don't understand. Rick has connections. He's been planning this for decades. He can make evidence disappear. Investigators look the other way. Then we don't rely on investigators. Emily pulled free and continued loading boxes. We rely on the truth, and we make sure so many people know the truth that Rick can't silence all of us. Before Will could argue further, headlights swept across the farmyard. A black SUV pulled up beside Will's Bentley, and Rick emerged with 2 men Will didn't recognize. Corporate types in expensive suits who moved with the fluid grace of professional security. "William," Rick called out as he approached. "I hoped we could resolve this quietly, but you seem determined to make things complicated." Will stepped protectively in front of Emily. "It's over, Rick. Emily has everything documented. Grace's letters, Carmen's recordings, the insurance investigation. The truth is already out there." Rick smiled coldly. "Is it? Because I think you'll find that evidence has a way of disappearing when it threatens the wrong people." He nodded to one of his men, who produced a tablet. "Environmental Protection Agency. Soil contamination report for this property, filed 3 hours ago. Amazing how quickly bureaucracy moves when properly motivated." Emily stepped around Will to face Rick directly. "You planted evidence. I revealed existing contamination that previous owners failed to disclose. Very serious violations. Criminal violations, in fact." Rick's tone was conversational, almost friendly, the kind that result in federal charges and massive cleanup costs. "Nobody will believe. They'll believe what the evidence shows. Buried drums of banned pesticides, groundwater contamination, falsified records going back decades. Your grandmother was quite the environmental criminal, it seems." Emily's face went white. "Carmen would never. Carmen is dead. Dead people make excellent scapegoats." Rick stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen, Emily. You're going to sign over the property to cover the cleanup costs and legal settlements. Then you're going to disappear permanently. And if I refuse," Rick's smile never wavered, "then you'll join your mother in an unfortunate accident. Will can build a lovely memorial garden where your house used to stand." Will felt rage boiling in his chest. "You sick bastard! Careful, little brother. You're already complicit in the environmental cover-up. Your company's preliminary surveys somehow missed all that contamination. Makes you either criminally negligent or an active conspirator." The trap was elegant and devastating. Rick had spent 28 years perfecting his methods, learning how to destroy lives with legal precision. He didn't just kill people anymore. He destroyed them systematically, using the law itself as a weapon. But he'd made one crucial mistake. "You know what's funny, Rick?" Will said, pulling out his phone. "You always were too confident for your own good. What are you?" Will tapped the screen, and Rick's voice filled the night air. "I eliminated an obstacle. Grace was a liability. Will, she was going to drag you down. I did what needed to be done to protect your future." Rick's face went ashen. "You recorded our conversation. Every word, your confession to murdering Grace, your admission about the brake lines, your threats against Emily, and it's already been uploaded to 3 different servers." Will's smile was sharp as a blade. "The truth is already out there, Rick. No matter what happens to us, everyone will know what you did." One of Rick's men reached inside his jacket, but Emily's voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't do that." Everyone turned. Emily stood beside her pickup truck, holding what looked like a small device with a red button. "Dead man's switch," she explained calmly. "If my heart stops beating, or if I let go of this button, every major news outlet in the country receives a complete copy of the evidence against Rick Hargrove. CNN, Fox News, The New York Times, Washington Post, plus social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. By morning, Rick's confession will have 1 million views." Rick's composure finally cracked. "You're bluffing. Try me." Emily's voice was steady, but Will could see her hands trembling slightly. "I've had 27 years to plan for this moment, Rick. My mother's best friend spent decades preparing me for the day you'd come back to finish what you started." "Carmen," Rick breathed. "Carmen knew you'd never let sleeping dogs lie. She knew that eventually, your greed would bring you back to Hope Valley, back to the scene of your crime, so she prepared for it. Evidence in multiple locations, Trusted allies who know the truth. Automatic fail-safes that activate if anything happens to me. Will stared at his daughter with a mixture of terror and fierce pride. She'd inherited Grace's courage and his strategic mind, but she'd added something neither of them had possessed: patience. While Rick had been building his empire and Will had been running from his grief, Emily had been preparing for war. "What do you want?" Rick asked finally. "Justice." Emily's voice was clear as a bell. "Public confession, full accountability for Grace's murder and everything you've done since. And you stay away from this land, this community, and this family forever. That's not going to happen. Then we do this the hard way." Emily shifted her grip on the dead man's switch. "Will, call 911. Tell them we have a confession to a 28-year-old murder and evidence of current criminal conspiracy." Will started to dial, but Rick lunged forward. "Stop!" The sound of a gunshot split the night air. Rick stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, as Sheriff Patricia Valdez emerged from behind the barn with her weapon drawn. "Richard Hargrove, you're under arrest for the murder of Grace Whitaker, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making terroristic threats." More deputies materialized from the shadows around the farmyard. "You have the right to remain silent." Will stared in shock as his brother was handcuffed and read his rights. "How did you—" "Emily called me an hour ago," Sheriff Valdez explained. "Said she had evidence in a decades-old murder case and reason to believe the perpetrator was coming here tonight to threaten witnesses." Emily finally released the dead man's switch, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. "Carmen always said the best defense was good preparation and better allies." As Rick was led away to the patrol car, he looked back at Will with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've done. This goes deeper than just me, Will. There are people involved in this who will make sure—" "Shut up, Rick." Will's voice was tired but final. "Just shut up." The patrol car disappeared into the night, taking with it the man who had stolen 28 years of Will's life. But as Will looked around the farmyard, at Emily putting her evidence boxes back in the house, at the sunflower fields swaying in the moonlight, at the place where Grace had lived and loved and died, he realized that some things couldn't be stolen. Love endured, truth surfaced, and families, no matter how broken, could find their way back to each other. "Is it over?" Emily asked quietly, coming to stand beside him. Will put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, breathing in the scent of sunflowers and home. "The beginning of it is, there would be trials, investigations, difficult questions about Will's own company and its connections to Rick's crimes. There would be media attention and legal complications, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust in a community that had been betrayed. But for the first time in 28 years, Will felt like himself again. Not the grief-driven businessman who'd built an empire on loss, but the young man who'd once dreamed of creating beautiful things that would last for generations. The man Grace had fallen in love with, the father Emily deserved. "Come on," he said to his daughter. "Let's go home." 3 months later, the morning sun painted Hope Valley in shades of gold and green as Will stood on the front porch of what was now officially known as the Carter Hargrove farmhouse. Emily had insisted on keeping Carmen's last name in the property deed, a tribute to the woman who'd raised her and protected Grace's secrets for nearly 3 decades. In his hands, Will held the architectural plans he'd been working on for weeks, not demolition blueprints this time, but restoration designs. The old farmhouse would be preserved and expanded, with a workshop where he could design buildings that honored the past while embracing the future. Grace would have loved it. More coffee. Emily emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 steaming mugs and wearing one of Carmen's old gardening aprons over her jeans. "Thanks." Will accepted the mug gratefully. Living in the farmhouse these past months had been an adjustment after decades of Manhattan penthouses and 5-star hotels, but it was the kind of adjustment that felt like coming home rather than moving backward. "Any word from the prosecutor's office?" Will nodded. "Rick's trial starts next month, with his confession on tape and all the evidence Carmen preserved. His lawyers are pushing for a plea deal. 25 to life. No possibility of parole." Emily leaned against the porch railing, gazing out at the sunflower fields that were just beginning to bloom again. "Good. Grace deserves justice." The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of revelations and reckonings. Rick's arrest had triggered a federal investigation into his business practices, uncovering decades of corruption, fraud, and intimidation. Several other suspicious deaths in towns where Hargrove development had operated were being reopened as potential murders. The environmental charges against Emily had been dropped within hours of Rick's confession, revealed as completely fabricated evidence. Will's own company had been cleared of wrongdoing after extensive investigation. Rick had operated his criminal enterprises through shell companies and offshore accounts, carefully keeping his brother's legitimate business separate from his illegal activities. But the moral weight of having unknowingly built his empire alongside a murderer had driven Will to make major changes. "I got a call from the mayor this morning," Emily said. "The town council officially voted to approve your revised development plan." Will smiled. Instead of bulldozing Hope Valley for a luxury resort, he was now spearheading the Hope Valley Historic Preservation Project, a carefully planned community development that would restore the town's historic buildings, support local businesses, and create sustainable tourism while maintaining the area's rural character. It was exactly the kind of project Grace would have championed. And the Morris farm. Pete signed the papers yesterday. He's thrilled to sell the back 40 for the visitor center while keeping the original homestead as a working farm. Emily grinned. He said, "If Grace Whitaker's boyfriend can learn to see sense after 28 years, there's hope for anybody." They'd gone public with their relationship 6 weeks ago, when Emily testified at a preliminary hearing about Rick's crimes. The story of the billionaire developer who discovered his murdered girlfriend's daughter had captured national attention. But Hope Valley had rallied around them both, to the community. Emily was still Carmen's girl, and Will was Grace's young man, come home at last. "Speaking of Grace," Will said, pulling a small wooden box from his pocket, "I have something for you." Emily set down her coffee mug and opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a simple engagement ring, a small diamond surrounded by tiny emeralds that perfectly matched Emily's eyes. "It was your mother's," Will said quietly. "I gave it to her on Christmas Eve, 1996. Carmen found it among Grace's things after the accident and kept it safe all these years." Emily lifted the ring with trembling fingers. "She was wearing this when she died. According to the police report, yes, it should have come back to me with her other personal effects, but somehow it ended up with Carmen instead." Will's voice was thick with emotion. "I think Carmen always planned to give it to you when you were old enough to understand what it meant. A symbol of the love that created me, the greatest love I've ever known, until I found you." Emily slipped the ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting 27 years to find its way home. "Tell me about the proposal, the real one." Will leaned back against the porch post, his eyes distant with memory. "It was snowing, December 23rd, 1996. We were supposed to go Christmas shopping, but Grace wanted to stop by the sunflower field first. Said she wanted to see how the snow looked on the dried stalks. Romantic. Grace found beauty in everything, even winter fields that most people would consider dead and ugly." Will smiled at the memory. "I had the ring in my pocket for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Fancy dinner, sunset on a mountaintop, something worthy of the movies. But standing there in the snow, watching her spin around with her arms outstretched, laughing at nothing but pure joy, I realized the perfect moment wasn't about the setting, it was about her." "What did you say?" "I told her I wanted to spend every day for the rest of my life watching her find magic in ordinary things. I told her I wanted to build beautiful buildings where she could fill them with beautiful memories. I told her I loved her more than I'd ever thought it was possible to love another person." Emily wiped tears from her cheeks. "And what did she say?" "She said yes before I finished asking the question. Then she tackled me into a snowbank and we both got completely soaked." Will laughed. "Carmen had to loan us dry clothes when we showed up at her door looking like drowned rats. I wish I could have known her." "You did know her. Every time you defend something beautiful that other people want to destroy, every time you show kindness to a hurt animal, every time you stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous, that's Grace. She lives on in you." A car pulled into the driveway, interrupting the moment. Will recognize the vehicle immediately. Marcus, his assistant, arriving for their weekly business meeting. But these days, those meetings looked very different than they had in Manhattan. "Mr. Hargrove," Marcus called as he approached the porch, briefcase in hand. "The investors for the Sustainable Tourism Project want to move forward with funding." And the architects you consulted on the historic building restorations submitted their preliminary reports. Good news? Excellent news. The old Miller's Creek Bridge can definitely be restored to original specifications. The Hope Valley Inn just needs structural reinforcement to meet modern safety codes while maintaining its 1890s character. And the old grain mill. Marcus grinned. It's perfect for conversion to a renewable energy demonstration site. Emily squeezed Will's arm. Grace would love that. Preserving the old while embracing new technology. There's something else, Marcus continued. I got a call from the Smithsonian. They want to discuss your donation of the Grace Whitaker Memorial Archive to their Preservation Research Center. Will had decided to donate all of Grace's letters, journals, and photographs to create a research collection for historic preservation students. It seemed fitting that her passion for saving beautiful old things would help train the next generation of preservationists. Schedule it for next week, Will said. Emily should be part of that conversation too, as Marcus headed inside to set up for their meeting. Emily turned to Will, with a question that had been building for weeks. What happens now? After the trial? After all the projects are complete? After everything settles down? What do we do with the rest of our lives? Will looked out at the sunflower fields, at the town where he'd first learned to love and first learned to lose, at the daughter who'd brought meaning back to his existence. We build something beautiful, he said simply. Something that lasts. Something Grace would be proud of. A family. A family. A home. A legacy of choosing love over fear, preservation over profit, truth over convenient lies. Will put his arm around Emily's shoulders. We honor your mother's memory by living the life she wanted us to have. Together, finally. After all these years, Emily leaned into his embrace, Grace's engagement ring catching the morning sunlight. In the distance, the first bees of the day were beginning their work among the sunflowers, and the sound of children's laughter drifted from the nearby elementary school where Grace had once been a student. Hope Valley was waking up to another day, another chance to choose hope over despair, community over isolation, love over loss. And for the first time in 28 years, Will Hargrove was exactly where he belonged, home, with his daughter, building something beautiful that would last for generations, just as he and Grace had always planned.